Elliot Reeve had never intended to become an accidental ambassador to an alien empire. He was, by all accounts, an unremarkable man in his mid-30s, with a modest job calibrating deep space sensors for the Terran Exploratory Commission. His days consisted of black coffee, diagnostic readouts, and the occasional daydream about retiring to a quiet cabin somewhere with gravity that didn't try to kill you. That morning, or what passed for morning on the Mimosa, his small, aging survey vessel, he had been nursing a cup of synth coffee that tasted faintly of regret when the alarms began screaming. Red lights pulsed across the console like an angry heartbeat. The ship lurched as an invisible force locked onto its hull, pulling it sideways through the void with the inevitability of a parent dragging a reluctant child to bedtime. Tractor beam, his brain supplied belatedly. Not the friendly kind used by rescue tugs. This was military-grade, cold, and precise. He barely had time to spill his coffee before the viewscreen filled with the sleek, obsidian silhouette of a Zalari flagship. The Zalari Imperium was not unknown to humanity. They were the sort of civilization that appeared in briefing hallas with phrases like highly advanced, territorially assertive, and do not provoke under any circumstances. Elliot's ship had drifted too close to what the charts cheerfully labeled as disputed space, and now he was paying the price. The Mimosa groaned as docking clamps engaged, metal kissing metal with a sound like a coffin lid closing. A calm, synthetic voice from his translator collar chirped, "Incoming boarding party. Recommend compliance and minimal sarcasm." Elliot muttered something about the computer's sudden sense of humor and stood up, smoothing his rumpled jumpsuit as if that might make him look more official. The airlock hissed open, revealing 4 towering Zalari in angular armor that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. Their faces were partially obscured by visors, but Elliot could make out the elegant sweep of elongated ears and skin the color of polished moonstone. They moved with predatory grace, plasma pikes humming faintly in their grips. One gestured sharply for him to step forward. Elliot raised his hand slowly, palms out, the universal sign for "I come in peace" and also "please don't vaporize me." They flanked him without a word, marching him down corridors of black alloy lit by veins of violet bioluminescence. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something floral, like night-blooming jasmine grown in a laboratory. His boots echoed too loudly against the deck plating. They brought him to a vast circular chamber that felt more like a cathedral than a throne room. Pillars of translucent crystal rose toward a domed ceiling that displayed a live starfield, constellations wheeling in perfect silence. At the far end, on a raised dais of polished onyx, stood an empty throne flanked by more guards and a cluster of robed officials whose ears twitched in what Elliot hoped was curiosity rather than irritation. A low chime sounded, and the assembly straightened as one. Then she entered. Queen Zorelia of the Zalari Imperium did not walk so much as glide. Her long cloak of midnight fabric swept the floor behind her, embroidered with threads that shimmered like captured starlight. She was tall, easily a head above Elliot, with skin that shifted subtly between silver and pale lavender, depending on how the light struck it. Her eyes were molten mercury, sharp and ancient, and her ears curved upward in elegant points, adorned with tiny rings of iridescent metal. A crown of woven crystal rested lightly on her brow, pulsing faintly in time with her heartbeat. The chamber seemed to dim slightly in deference to her presence, as though the very light knew better than to compete. Elliot's mouth went dry. He had seen images of Zalari nobility in briefings, sterile and distant, but nothing prepared him for the reality of her. She was regal, yes, but also impossibly alive, every movement deliberate yet fluid, like water poured over glass. His brain, usually so quick with a quip or a technical specification, short-circuited. The translator beetle on his collar vibrated once, waiting for input. Zorelia stopped a few paces away, regarding him with cool detachment. One elegant brow arched slightly. "Human," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air feel heavier. The translator rendered it perfectly, though it couldn't quite capture the undercurrent of authority. You have trespassed in Zalari space. State your purpose and your credentials." Elliot opened his mouth. What came out was not the carefully rehearsed diplomatic statement he had half-formed in his mind during the march here. Instead, the words tumbled free before he could stop them. "You're so beautiful, I can't even speak." The chamber froze. Every ear in the room snapped upright. The translator beetle let out a confused chirp and went silent. A guard's plasma pike clattered to the floor with a metallic ring that seemed deafening in the sudden hush. One of the robed officials, a protocol droid in organic form, emitted a string of error beeps and began to smoke faintly. Zoralia blinked once, slowly, as though processing a language she had never encountered. Then, impossibly, color bloomed across her cheeks. Not red, but a soft iridescent blue that spread like ink in water, shimmering from her cheekbones down to the elegant line of her throat. Her ears flipped backward in what Elliot would later learn was the Zalari equivalent of a mortified flinch. "I beg your pardon?" she said, her tone icy enough to frost the crystal pillars. Elliot felt his face heat to approximately the temperature of a re-entry burn. That is, my brain appears to have encountered an unexpected firewall, Your Majesty." "Ma'am, Queen, I didn't mean, well, I did mean it, but not like that. Or maybe exactly like that. I'm not good at this." The blue on her cheeks deepened, and her ears twitched again, this time forward, as though trying to decide whether to be outraged or intrigued. A low sound rippled through the assembled court, not quite laughter, but something close, quickly stifled. Zoralia took one measured step back, her cloak whispering against the stone. "You are the diplomat sent by Terra?" Elliot rubbed the back of his neck. "Technically, I'm more of a sensor technician who got lost. The commission didn't exactly send me with a portfolio. I was calibrating long-range arrays when your tractor beam decided I looked interesting." Her silver eyes narrowed. "You insult our sovereignty with incompetence and then insult my dignity with unfiltered candor." "I wouldn't call it an insult," Elliot said, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, it was a compliment. A very honest one. Humans do that sometimes. We see someone, and the filter between brain and mouth just evaporates." Zoralia studied him for a long moment. The blush was fading, but not entirely. A faint luminescence lingered along her cheekbones like distant aurora. She tilted her head, ears angling toward him as though listening to something beyond his words. "Your species is known for emotional inefficiency. This appears to be a primary example." Elliot gave a weak smile. Guilty. "Look, if you're going to imprison me or dissect me or whatever the protocol is here, could we maybe skip to that part? The suspense is worse than the coffee on my ship." A ripple of amusement passed through the court again, this time less restrained. Zorelia's lips curved, just the smallest fraction, into something that might have been a smile if queens were allowed such things. "You will be placed under guest surveillance pending further inquiry. Your honesty is disarming and potentially dangerous." She turned slightly toward her advisors. "Escort him to appropriate quarters. Ensure he does not wander. And someone repair that droid before it starts reciting poetry." The guards moved forward, but more gently this time. As they led him away, Elliot glanced back. Zoralia was still watching him, one hand resting lightly on the arm of her throne. The blue had almost vanished from her skin, but her ears remained tilted in his direction, as though reluctant to let the moment end. Elliot's heart hammered against his ribs. He had survived first contact, barely, and somehow, in the process, he had made an alien queen blush. The corridors seemed longer on the way back. Elliot's mind raced, replaying the scene in excruciating detail. He had blurted the first thing that came to mind because, well, it was true. She was beautiful, devastatingly so, and his mouth had decided that silence was not an option. Now he was a guest prisoner on a flagship belonging to a species that valued composure above all else, and he had just cracked that composure like cheap glass. He wondered how long it would take for the incident to reach Terra. Probably minutes. Diplomatic cables traveled faster than light, and embarrassment traveled faster than that. His quarters turned out to be surprisingly luxurious. A suite with a viewport overlooking the swirling nebula outside, furniture that molded itself to his body when he sat, and a food dispenser that offered options labeled an elegant script he couldn't read. The door sealed behind him with a polite chime. He sank onto the edge of the bed, running both hands through his hair. "Well done, Elliot," he muttered. "You've officially become a galactic incident. Mom would be so proud." Outside, in the throne room, Zorelia remained standing long after the human had gone. Her advisors murmured among themselves, debating protocols and precedents. She ignored them. One finger traced the edge of her throne, feeling the cool stone. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not in 3 centuries of rule. No one had dared. Her cheeks warmed again at the memory, and she pressed a hand there, as though she could force the color away. It didn't work. For the first time in memory, the Queen of the Zalari felt something dangerously close to vulnerability. And she wasn't entirely sure she hated it. The guest suite's viewport framed a nebula that looked like spilled ink laced with dying stars, beautiful in the way things are when they're dying slowly. Elliot had spent the first hour pacing, then the next 2 sitting on the edge of the adaptive couch, trying not to think about how every surface in the room seemed to be quietly watching him. The furniture adjusted itself whenever he shifted weight. The lighting dimmed when his pupils dilated from stress, and the air carried the faintest trace of that same night-blooming jasmine scent he'd noticed in the throne room. It was considerate hospitality, the kind that reminded him he was a specimen under glass. He had tried talking to the walls, asking for a status update, a glass of water, even the local equivalent of sports scores, but the room only responded with polite chimes and the occasional soft glow of affirmation. No conversation, no sarcasm. Just Zalari efficiency wrapped in velvet. Sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Zorelia's face, the slow bloom of iridescent blue across her cheekbones, the startled backward flick of her ears, the way her silver eyes had widened for one unguarded second before the mask of queenship slammed back into place. He had embarrassed an empress in front of her court. On Earth, that might earn a viral clip and 6 months of memes. Here, on a warship the size of a small moon, it might earn him a very polite execution, or worse, an indefinite stay in diplomatic limbo. He rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling, which obligingly displayed a soft simulation of Terra's night sky, as though trying to comfort him. It only made him homesick. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door parted without waiting for his permission, revealing one of the robed officials from the throne room. This one was shorter than the guards, with narrower shoulders and ears pierced with a single thin ring of black crystal. Her skin held the same moonstone sheen, but faint violet lines traced geometric patterns along her forearms. Tattoos or rank markers, Elliot couldn't tell. She carried a small tray that floated half a meter in front of her, laden with 2 crystalline cups and a pitcher of something that glowed pale gold. "I am Advisor Lyrian," she said, voice smooth and carefully neutral. The translator beetle on Elliot's collar purred the words into English with only the slightest delay. "Her Majesty has instructed me to ascertain whether your dietary requirements can be met and whether you require additional comforts." Elliot sat up, suddenly aware that he was still wearing the same rumpled jumpsuit from yesterday. Thanks, I'm not picky. Whatever you've got that isn't poisonous to humans is fine. And maybe something to read or watch. I'm going a little stir-crazy in here." Lyrian tilted her head, ears swiveling slightly. "Stircracy, an idiom. Confinement produces restlessness in your species." She set the tray on a low table that rose smoothly from the floor. The pitcher poured itself into both cups without being touched. The liquid settled into gentle spirals of light. "This is Salif, a mild stimulant derived from stellar algae. It will not harm you. We have cross-referenced your medical profile from the vessel's databanks." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You hacked my ship already?" "We appropriated relevant data to ensure your well-being during detention." She said it like she was reading from a manual. "Your physiology is fragile. Low gravity tolerance, inefficient oxygen processing, susceptibility to radiation. We are taking precautions. Appreciate it, he muttered, and took a cautious sip. The Salith tasted like honey warmed by sunlight, with an aftertaste of ozone. Warmth spread immediately through his chest, loosening the knot of anxiety he hadn't realized was there. Okay, that's really good. Thank you. Lyrian watched him drink, then spoke again, quieter this time. Your statement in the audience chamber has caused discussion. Elliot nearly choked. Yeah, I noticed the plasma pike hitting the floor. Not my finest diplomatic moment. The Queen has ruled for 317 cycles. No being has ever addressed her with such unguarded candor. Not even her consorts in private. Lyrian's ears flicked forward, a gesture Elliot was beginning to recognize as curiosity. Zalari do not speak desire so plainly. We imply, we observe. We wait for the other to deduce intent. Your words bypassed every layer of protocol. It was equivalent to shouting across a silent hall. Elliot rubbed his face. I didn't plan it. It just happened. 1 second I'm trying to remember the first contact checklist. The next, I'm telling your boss she's so beautiful my vocabulary evaporated. Lyrian's lips curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. The court is still debating whether it constitutes an insult, a declaration of intent, or evidence of mental instability. Several advisors have already drafted formal apologies on your behalf. Others have suggested you be returned to your vessel with a stern reprimand and a memory purge. Memory purge? Elliot's voice rose an octave. A selective neural dampening. Standard procedure for minor diplomatic breaches. You would retain your identity and most experiences, but the specific incident would feel like a dream you cannot quite recall. Elliot set the cup down carefully. Pass. I'd rather own the embarrassment than have someone else edit it out of my head. Lyrian studied him for a long moment. That is refreshingly stubborn. The Queen has noticed. Elliot blinked. She's noticed me being stubborn? She has noticed everything about the encounter. Lyrian's tone softened further, almost conspiratorial. She retired to her private chambers sooner than usual. She did not summon her usual musicians. She paced something she has not done since the border wars ended. And she asked me personally to ensure your comfort tonight. Elliot felt his pulse kick up again. Why tell me that? Because you appear to be the sort of creature who speaks truth, even when it is unwise. And because I have served Her Majesty long enough to recognize when something disrupts her equilibrium. Lyrian straightened, ears returning to their neutral position. I will leave you now. The room will provide entertainment if you request it. Terran archives have been partially integrated. Rest. Tomorrow. You will be summoned again. She turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. One final observation. When the blue appeared on her skin, it was not merely embarrassment. Among our people, that particular hue signifies a rare convergence of surprise, flattery, and reciprocal interest. It has not been seen on Her Majesty in living memory. The door closed behind her before Elliot could respond. He sat there for several minutes, staring at the empty tray. The Salith had left him alert rather than sleepy, his thoughts racing in neat, dangerous circles. Reciprocal interest. From a queen who could order his ship disassembled molecule by molecule. From a being who probably viewed humans the way humans viewed particularly clever lab rats. He laughed once, a short, incredulous sound, then buried his face in his hands. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of half-dreams. Silver eyes watching him from across starfields, ears flicking in silent questions, blue light spreading like wildfire across flawless skin. When the chime woke him hours later, the room had already prepared a fresh jumpsuit black with subtle violet threading that matched the ship's interior, lighting and a tray of what looked suspiciously like scrambled eggs and toast. Human food. Someone had gone to considerable trouble. The summons arrived via Lyrian again. This time she was accompanied by only one guard, and the walk to the private audience chamber felt shorter, less like a march to judgment. The chamber itself was smaller than the throne room, intimate by Zalari standards, walls of living crystal that pulsed gently with inner light, a low table set with more salif and delicate plates of fruit that shimmered like. The private audience chamber felt smaller now that only the two of them occupied it, as though the crystal walls had drawn closer to listen. Zorelia sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, yet her ears betrayed her, the tips angled toward Elliot like compass needles finding north. The nebula outside the viewport painted shifting colors across her skin, amethyst one moment, rose gold the next, making the faint residual luminescence on her cheekbones flicker like embers stirred by wind. Elliot tried not to stare. He failed. Every time he looked away, his gaze drifted back, pulled by the same gravitational curiosity that had made him blurt the compliment in the first place. The salif in his cup had gone cold, but he kept his fingers wrapped around the crystal anyway, needing something solid to hold. Zorelia spoke first, voice low enough that the translator beetle had to strain. "You are not what we expected from a Terran representative. Our intelligence dossiers describe your species as calculating, verbose, prone to layered meanings and strategic omissions. You, however, appear to possess no filter whatsoever." Elliot gave a lopsided shrug. "Most humans have one. Mine just shorted out when I saw you. I've spent years calibrating instruments that measure things a billion light years away. Turns out the most overwhelming signal I've ever received was standing 10 meters in front of me wearing a crown." Her ears flicked once, sharply, then settled. The blue hue threatened to return, but didn't quite crest the surface of her skin. Flattery is a currency among many species. With us it is rare and more dangerous because we do not dissemble. When a Zalari expresses admiration, it is absolute. There is no half measure, no polite exaggeration. Your words landed like a declaration, not a pleasantry. "I wasn't trying to declare anything," Elliot said, then paused. "Okay, maybe I was, a little. But mostly I was just stunned. You walk into a room and physics rearranges itself around you. How am I supposed to pretend that's normal?" Zorelia studied him for several heartbeats. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a soft melodic sound that carried faint harmonics, like distant chimes carried on wind. The sound startled both of them. Her hand flew to her mouth as though to capture the noise and return it to wherever it had come from. When she lowered it, her expression was almost sheepish. "I have not laughed in open court since I was a child. My tutors spent decades training that impulse out of me." Elliot leaned forward slightly. "Then I'm honored. Even if it means I'm probably going to be spaced for corrupting royal dignity." "You will not be spaced," she said firmly, "though several advisors are still advocating for it." She rose and moved to the viewport, gazing out at the nebula's slow churn. 3 centuries ago, I ascended after my mother's assassination. The Imperium was fracturing border clans in rebellion, rival houses maneuvering for the throne, the military divided. I ended the civil war not with mercy or compromise, but with absolute clarity. I removed ambiguity. I made every decision final, every word measured. The court learned to read silence better than speech. And in that silence, I became untouchable. Elliot listened without interrupting. He sensed this was not preamble. It was confession. "Untouchable is also lonely," she continued, voice quieter still. "No one speaks to me without calculation. No one looks at me without agenda. Until you arrived, dragged in by your malfunctioning vessel, spilling coffee and worse truth across my floor. You looked at me and saw a me, not the crown, not the lineage, just the being standing there. And you said so, aloud, in front of witnesses." Elliot stood slowly, not wanting to loom but needing to close some of the distance between them. "I'm sorry if it humiliated you." "It did not humiliate me." She turned to face him fully. "It startled me. And startled things are dangerous things. Especially when the startled thing rules an empire that spans 3 sectors. Her silver eyes held his without blinking. "Do you regret the words?" "No," he said immediately. "I regret the timing, the audience, maybe the volume. But not the truth of them. Zorelia stepped close enough that he could smell that faint jasmine and ozone scent again. Close enough to see the tiny rings in her ears catch the nebula light and throw it back in miniature rainbows. Then speak more truth. Tell me what you see when you look at me now. Elliot's throat tightened. This was not banter anymore. This was something rawer, something that felt like standing at the edge of an airlock with the outer door cycling open. He took a breath. I see someone who's carried the weight of a galaxy for so long that she's forgotten what it feels like to set it down even for a second. I see strength that doesn't need armor because the armor grew into her skin. I see beauty that isn't just aesthetic, it's gravitational. It bends light, bends time, bends idiots like me into saying stupid honest things. And right now I see someone who's trying very hard not to let anyone see she's curious about what happens next. Her ears angled forward so sharply they nearly touched. The blue returned, not a faint wash this time, but a vivid bloom that spread from her cheeks down her throat and across her collarbones, shimmering like liquid sapphire under moonlight. She did not try to hide it. Instead, she lifted her chin, letting him see. "You are correct," she said. "I am curious." Dangerously so. Elliot swallowed. Curious enough to keep the idiot technician around instead of shipping him home in a box? Curious enough to consider an experiment. She gestured to the low table. A holographic interface shimmered into existence above it, displaying star charts, diplomatic treaties, fleet dispositions. The border where your vessel was intercepted is contested. Terra claims mineral rights. The Imperium claims ancestral sovereignty. Negotiations have stalled for decades because neither side will yield. My advisors propose a show of force. Yours propose sanctions. Both paths lead to attrition. She tapped the hala. It zoomed to a single system, a dim red star orbited by a ringed gas giant and a handful of moons. This is Kelith 9, neutral ground, barren, strategically useless, but symbolically potent. If we were to meet there, personally, without entourages, without recorded proceedings, perhaps we could speak plainly, as you seem compelled to do. Perhaps we could find a resolution neither court would accept if proposed by committee. Elliot stared at the glowing map. You're suggesting a secret summit, just you and me, on a rock in the middle of nowhere. I am suggesting we remove layers, she corrected. No protocol, no witnesses, only two beings attempting clarity. If it fails, we return to our respective positions, and no one is the wiser. If it succeeds, she let the sentence hang. Elliot felt the room tilt slightly, not from the ship, but from the sheer improbability of the moment. And if the court finds out you snuck off to talk to the human who called you beautiful in open session, they will assume espionage, seduction, or temporary insanity. All three have precedence. Her almost smile returned, sharper this time. I have ruled long enough to know how to manage perception. The question is whether you are willing to risk your career, your freedom, perhaps your life, on the chance that plain speech between us might avert a war. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her, really looked. At the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table, the blue that still hadn't entirely faded. She was asking him to gamble everything on the same reckless honesty that had landed him here in the first place. And somehow that felt less terrifying than saying no. Okay, he said at last. Let's try plain speech on Caliph 9, but on one condition. Her brow arched. Name it. You let yourself laugh again if something's funny, even once, deal? Zorelia regarded him for a long moment. Then, deliberately, she let another soft laugh escape, shorter this time, but genuine. The blue on her skin flared brighter before settling into a steady, contented glow. Deal, she dismissed the hollow with a wave. We depart in 12 cycles. I will arrange transport that avoids detection. You will be listed as confined to quarters for medical observation. Lyrian will handle the deception. She paused at the door, turning back. Rest, Technician Reeve. Tomorrow begins the part where truth becomes policy. The door closed behind her. Elliot stood alone in the suddenly too large chamber, heart hammering, mind spinning with the absurdity and the possibility of what he'd just agreed to. Somewhere beyond the viewport, a nebula continued its slow, indifferent ballet. He sank back onto the couch and stared at the ceiling until it obligingly showed him Terra again. For the first time since waking up in this alien nightmare-turned-fairy tale, he didn't feel afraid. He felt awake. The shuttle that carried them to Calith 9 was small enough to slip through sensor nets like smoke through fingers. No regal markings, no escort wing, just a matte black needle with engines tuned to whisper instead of roar. Zorelia piloted it herself, another small heresy against protocol, and Elliot sat in the co-pilot seat trying not to look like a man who had accidentally hijacked an empress. The journey took 17 hours by ship's clock. They spoke little at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was careful, the kind of quiet two people share when they know the next words might change everything. Occasionally Zorelia would adjust a control, her long fingers moving with surgical grace, and Elliot would catch himself watching the way light slid along the delicate rings in her ears. She caught him once and let the corner of her mouth lift in that almost smile he was beginning to crave. Calith 9's surface was a monochrome hellscape, cracked basalt plains under a blood-red sun, ringed shadows striping the ground like prison bars. The only color came from thin veins of mineral salts that glowed faint turquoise in the twilight zones. They landed near one such vein, the shuttle settling with a sigh of hydraulics. Zorelia powered down the systems, then sat motionless for a long moment, staring through the canopy at the barren horizon. "No recordings," she said quietly. "No witnesses. Whatever is spoken here stays here. If we fail, we simply never met." Elliot unbuckled. "And if we succeed?" "Then we rewrite one small corner of history without anyone knowing we touched the pen." She rose, taller in the confined space, and opened the hatch. Cold, thin air rushed in, carrying the metallic bite of ozone and dust. They stepped out together. The ground crunched underfoot like broken glass. Elliot pulled his jacket tighter. Zorelia seemed unbothered by the chill, though her breath misted in faint silver plumes. They walked in parallel, not quite side by side, until they reached a low ridge overlooking a shallow crater. At its center lay a frozen lake of liquid methane, mirror black and perfectly still, reflecting the red sun like spilled blood. They stopped at the edge. Neither spoke for several minutes. The wind made a low keening sound through the rocks. Zorelia broke the silence first. 317 years. I have signed declarations of war, ratified trade pacts, condemned traitors, elevated houses, dissolved them. Every signature was final. Every word weighed against the survival of the Imperium. And yet here, on this dead moon, I find myself without precedent. No protocol exists for this. Elliot shoved his hands into his pockets. Humans don't have protocols for this either. We just show up and hope we don't ruin it. She turned to face him fully. The red sunlight caught the violet streaks in her hair and turned them to fire. Then show up. Speak plainly, as you promised. Tell me why a sensor technician from a backwater planet would risk everything to stand on a barren rock with the ruler of an empire that could erase his species with a single command. Elliot met her gaze without flinching. Because the first time I saw you, I understood something I'd never understood before. Beauty isn't just something to look at. Sometimes it's something that rearranges you. You walked into that throne room and my whole stupid human brain went quiet for once. No calculations, no sarcasm, no defenses. Just recognition. Like I'd been waiting my whole life to see exactly that face wearing exactly that expression. And then I opened my mouth and ruined the moment. But I don't regret it because at least it was honest. And honesty is the only thing I've got that's worth anything out here. The blue began again, slow at first, then boulders spreading across her cheeks, down her throat, along the elegant lines of her collarbones, until it shimmered like a living aurora beneath her skin. This time she made no attempt to suppress it. Instead she stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her despite the freezing air. "Among my people," she said, voice barely above the wind, "such color is not mere embarrassment. It is acknowledgement, acceptance, a signal that the heart has recognized its mirror in another. It has not appeared on me since I was very young, before duty burned the capacity for it away, until you." Elliot's breath caught. "So what does that mean, right now?" "For us, it means I am no longer certain where the queen ends and the being begins." She lifted one hand slowly, hesitated, then let her fingertips brush the side of his face. Her touch was cool at first, then warmed almost instantly, as though her body was learning him in real time. "It means that for the first time in centuries, I want something that has nothing to do with borders or fleets or succession. I want to know what happens if I allow this recklessness to continue." Elliot covered her hand with his own, pressing it gently against his cheek, then let it continue, one step at a time. No treaties, no declarations. Just two people figuring out what plain speech looks like when nobody's watching. She searched his eyes for a long moment. Then, deliberately, she leaned down slow enough that he could have pulled away if he'd wanted to, and kissed him. It was careful at first, exploratory, the way someone might test unknown gravity. Her lips were softer than he'd imagined, tasting faintly of salith and starlight. When he kissed her back, she made a small sound, half surprise, half relief, and the blue on her skin flared so brightly it lit the rocks around them like bioluminescent dawn. Her ears angled forward, trembling slightly, then curled against her head in what he now knew was unguarded pleasure. They broke apart after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Zorelia rested her forehead against his, breathing unevenly. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Yeah," Elliot agreed, voice rough, "and nothing. The border stays contested, the fleets stay pointed at each other. But maybe, just maybe, we start talking instead of posturing, quietly, until the talking becomes louder than the threats." She pulled back enough to look at him, silver eyes bright. "You understand the risk. If this is discovered, then we'll deal with it when it happens. I'm not asking you to abdicate. I'm not asking to be consort or prince or whatever the Zalari version is. I'm just asking for more moments like this, wherever we can steal them." Zorelia studied him another heartbeat, then nodded once sharp, decisive, the same decisiveness that had ended a civil war. "Then we will steal them. Starting now." They stayed on Keleth 9 until the red sun dipped below the horizon and the methane lake began to glow with its own cold inner light. They talked about Terra's chaotic democracies, about the Zalari's rigid lineages, about childhood spent under different stars. They laughed her laugh still startlingly bright, his rough and unguarded. They kissed again, slower this time, learning the shape of each other in the gathering dark. When the cold finally drove them back to the shuttle, neither spoke of returning to their separate worlds. They simply strapped in, lifted off, and set course for the flagship in silence that no longer needed words to be full. Back aboard, Zorelia resumed her role as though nothing had changed. She summoned advisors, reviewed fleet dispositions, signed decrees with her usual unhurried precision. But Lyrian noticed the subtle differences. The Queen's ears no longer stayed rigidly upright during long sessions. Occasionally they tilted forward when a report mentioned the Terran border. And once, just once, when no one else was looking, a faint blue shimmer ghosted across Zorelia's cheekbones at the mention of Technician Reeves' name. Lyrian said nothing. Some silences were worth protecting. Elliot was quietly transferred to a diplomatic liaison, post-officially a punishment detail, unofficially a permanent channel. He calibrated sensors by day and on certain unmarked nights slipped aboard unmarked shuttles. Each rendezvous was brief, stolen, precious. They never spoke of forever. They spoke of next week, next month, next stolen hour. And in those hours, on dead moons and in shadowed hangars, two beings from warring stars practiced something rarer than peace treaties, the slow, patient art of seeing each other clearly. Centuries later, Historians would puzzle over the sudden de-escalation along the Zalari-Terran border. No grand accords were signed, no heroes emerged. Only a quiet shift, like a tide turning beneath the surface. Most attributed it to economic pressures, or mutual exhaustion, or the slow grind of diplomacy. A very few, those who had served long enough to remember a certain human technician, and a queen who once blushed the color of deep space, suspected something simpler, something older than empires. They suspected someone had once looked across a throne room and told the truth.
Creo que pueden mandar audios. A ver, manden audios.
Casi no te toman las caras.
Ok. Buscar a una persona que tenga, ¿cómo se dice? El ponytail. Ponytails o dos, o sea, dos colas, güey. Que tenga dos colas de caballo.
Oh my god, esto va a ser épico, papus.
Hola. ¿Huele feo? No, huele verga, huele chido.
Hola, soy nuevo, ¿me saludas?
No,
En español, güey.
dos colas de caballo. Ocupamos a alguien que tenga dos colas de caballo, o sea, un personaje, vaya.
Dos colas y una chuni.
Take a picture with somebody who has twin tails, or two people who has ponytails. Dos colas por una miku, güey. Una miku estaría chido de encontrar. Bueno, si se empieza a trobar me avisan, güey.
Una
¿Vale?
bolita.
¿Cómo? Busquen a una miku, ¿dónde está la pinche miku? La miku tiene dos de estas, la miku, ¿dónde está la pinche miku? ¿Qué van a contigo las loritas, compa? Abran los ojos por una miku, ¿Dónde queda la miku? Miku. Una miku.